Welcome back, everyone who listened in last week, or welcome to those who are just checking out our series for the first time. This is our second sit-down or virtual sit-down that I'm having with some BrainPark researchers and BrainPark students to kind of dig a little bit deeper, find out a little bit behind the researcher, find out a bit more about the research that goes on at BrainPark and the researchers that use the facility. As I mentioned last week, my name's James. I'm responsible for the day-to-day operations of BrainPark, and today I'm sitting down, or not quite sitting down, standing up as we are, with Dan Myles, who is a BrainPark PhD student. Welcome, Dan.
Thanks, James. Hi.
How's it going?
I'm well.
That's good. That's good. Looks like you got a lovely space. A bit of a nice setup there at home.
Yeah, I like to stand in front of the window to get the natural light for Zoom. It's been one of the little tricks I've learned.
Nice. So as with last week, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into science / why a PhD in science.
Okay, so it's a bit of a messy answer. I've always had a very broad set of academic interests. Like at school, I enjoyed doing both science and humanities. And when I started at uni, I actually did my first degree was an arts degree. So I studied philosophy and politics rather than science. But when studying philosophy of mind, it provoked all these interesting questions. So I decided to go and follow that up by studying psychology. But I think having sort of studied politics and ethics, and that being a big part of my first undergraduate, that sort of stayed with me throughout. So I really like those issues that sort of sit at the intersection of science and society, or science and social issues. And I think over time, I've developed a particular interest in how various quirks of about how the mind works can have important implications for policy making or like social consequences. And so governments and businesses have been increasingly relying on psychology and behavioral science in designing products or informing lawmaking and policy making. Some of these examples are pretty uncontroversial. So like it's illegal to drink and drive or to text and drive. And that's based on some really good public health evidence, but also some evidence about sort of attention while doing various tasks, like attention while texting. But other examples are a little more subtle. So they're usually called behavioural nudges. And some of the really high profile examples have been things like sort of changing the way information is presented to people to help reduce littering or reduce in other environmental things like energy use. But I kind of became increasingly interested in these things, and I get particularly interested in sort of less noble examples, I guess. So things like that, how the same ideas were being used to maybe in the pursuit of sort of profit-driven agendas that came at the expense of community interests.
Yeah.
And that sort of brought me to BrainPark and some of the academics who were there. So I got in contact with both Adrian Carter, who studies a lot of the really big ethical questions that are posed by neuroscience and technology and psychology, but also to Murat Yücel, who was working on setting up BrainPark and had an interest in gambling studies. And so that kind of is what drew me to BrainPark.
So it sounds like your previous interest drove you towards a PhD centered around some of the behavioral aspects of gambling. Tell us about your PhD and where you're at with it.
Yeah, so gambling is just full of really good examples of these less than noble attempts to use behavioral as science to kind of pursue profit kind of motives. And the pokies in particular use a lot of subtle strategies that make the game seem more enticing, or might blur the lines around when you're winning or when you're losing. They also like used a lot of science around how people walk through venues and stay in venues to the architectural design of casinos. And we think that collectively a lot of these strategies sort of take advantage of primal features in human learning and how we reason about things like chance and uncertainty. So we're running at BrainPark a number of studies that are sort of hoping to shed a little more light on the influence these kind of strategies have on gambling behavior. And so BrainPark has this really great VR facility, a virtual reality facility, where we're working with some software engineers to design a virtual reality pokies RSL. It's really closely modeled on like a typical Australian RSL. So there's a pub and there's a sports betting room, and then there's a pokies room in there as well. So we're kind of using that to try and increase the ecological validity of the research we're doing, because prior, a lot of the research on gambling has sort of occurred in really sterile, like kind of office or lab environments. And this gets all those sort of environmental background noises and sound effects sort of going while we're running our studies, but gives us the kind of experimental control that we would have in a lab-based setting.
Yeah, excellent. I mean, as you know, I've kind of worked relatively closely together with the industry partner that we work with to kind of improve the virtual environments that we have. And we often get asked kind of, how does it compare? How real is virtual reality? And once you've experienced it, once you're in there for a few minutes, you kind of can't fake that visceral experience when you have inside the VR, and kind of how real it becomes your reality. And so it can be an incredibly powerful tool to be able to, I guess, measure some of these things, be recording people's physiology at the same time, all this stuff that you can't do in a controlled way out in the real world, which is pretty cool.
Absolutely, yeah. I think the best example is that one of the really classic demonstrations of a VR environment has you standing on the edge of a building, and you can step out if you like, but you get this incredible sense of vertigo just on thinking about it, and like so clearly it gets you like in this really visceral way.
Yeah, that, and there's another one with a pretty realistic dinosaur that some people even get down on their hands and knees when the dinosaur walks over them, which is pretty funny to watch. Obviously, gambling is a pretty big topic within the COVID situation. Everyone at home, we've seen statistics around, especially in Australia, who we have an incredibly high propensity for gambling per population anywhere in the world, and that's only increased. The online gambling aspect has only increased during the situation we find ourselves in. Have you been involved in anything in response to that, or how has your project, I guess, transitioned during this working from home situation?
Yeah, it's a good question. So Australians are the biggest gamblers in the world per capita. We gamble and lose over $24 billion a year. And more than half of that is in pokies gambling. And so Murat, in partnership with a public health researcher known as Charles Livingston and my other supervisor, Adrian, are getting together and doing a study on how behavior is changing during the COVID lockdown. And so I've been lucky enough to be involved in that and sort of helping out. And I've put a few little questions in there that relate to my own PhD work. But that's hoping to look at not just if online gaming is increasing, but also like how different sort of types of gambling increase or decrease, how the closure of pokies venues is affecting people. Are people just stopping gambling altogether? Are they relieved about the closure of gambling venues, or are they anxious or stressed about that? And yet how behavior sort of changes and where it changes to, which kinds of online gambling are increasing, if at all.
Yeah, it's very interesting because I imagine, obviously Australia, sport-loving nation, that online sports betting prior to COVID would have been a large amount of our online gambling. However, across the world, we've seen obviously live sport virtually stop. There are a few leagues here and there in the world that are starting to wind back up again. But the fact that over that period, potentially a large majority of what we might have been gambling on kind of ended, the fact that it's still increased points to there might be some serious issues that are worth obviously researching as you guys are doing. You mentioned previously, and as with Kavya last week, one of our other students has some fingers in other pies. Can you tell me a little bit about some of your other work you do outside of your PhD?
So I've done various jobs outside my PhD along the way. I've done a number of research assistant roles. I did one job working in a public health setting, which was looking at how people recovered from traumatic injury. And particularly my involvement there was looking at how they recovered from traumatic brain injury from traffic accidents and assaults and sporting injuries. I've also done another job where I've been working at helping to evaluate sort of interventions in education at the public policy level through the University of Melbourne through their Centre of Program Evaluation. They do lots of work in education. And I've done another job working to help manage or help administer and run events for the Decision Science Hub at the University of Melbourne as well. So I have my fingers in lots of different pies, but definitely it's lots of opportunities to do different things.
Yeah, excellent. And finally, thank you very much for the chat today. Finally, why would someone do a PhD with us at BrainPark?
It's a really great place to work. There's a lovely big group of highly interesting and motivated people who are very friendly. There's also a really amazing set of resources. BrainPark itself is a really, really wonderful facility. There's loads of different stuff. The VR room's very cool. Obviously, I'm a big fan of the VR room, but also there's the really amazing gym set up there. Great, and it's like just a really beautiful environment. It's very, very different to maybe the kind of other spaces that a lot of psych research is otherwise done.
Yeah, and we're also, just to touch on that, incredibly fortunate to be co-located with Monash Biomedical Imaging, which has some state-of-the-art brain imaging facilities, multiple MRI scanners, EEG, TMS, eye tracking, the full gamut of neuroimaging that we kind of get to be physically located with to access as well, which is pretty cool. So yeah. Thank you very much, Dan, for virtually sitting down with me and having this chat. Good luck with your PhD. And again, thanks very much.
Cheers. Okay, so today we've spoken about some issues related to gambling. If you believe that you may be experiencing any gambling-related distress, or if you're at all concerned about a friend or a relative, we'd like to encourage you to seek out support and advice. We'll include some resources in the comment section below that can offer support in relation to gambling harm.